Welcome to Who the Chel Cares podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea. On this episode, I interviewed my parents. Have you ever wondered what it might be like to raise a limb-different child? Well, they talk a little bit about it. I asked a lot of questions, even ones I'd never asked before, and I really hope that if you're a parent out there with a child with a limb difference, that you get a lot out of this. My parents didn't have nearly the resources that we have today, or the influencers or activists or whatever you want to call us. And so I really hope that you're able to find comfort in this episode where my parents didn't necessarily have something like this when they were raising me. Okay. Mom and Dad, welcome. Thank you for being on my podcast.
Thanks for inviting us.
Nice to be here.
Couldn't do it without you, so you're a big part of this, and I'd love to hear. The reason I have you on today is because I would love to know what it was like from a parent's perspective raising a child with a limb difference, and especially through the 90s and early 2000s and before social media. Feel free to give any advice to any parents who have children with limb differences. Just sharing your experience, I'm sure, would give lots of input as well. So let's go. Let's ride.
Well, we might as well start at the beginning.
Yeah.
As I was giving birth, and I think everyone, unless they see it in an ultrasound or whatever, just takes for granted that they always say, she was born with 10 fingers, 10 toes, and now when I hear that, I'm just like, it means something different to me, there could be a lot worse than not having 10 fingers, 10 toes, but I remember when the doctor just kind of whisked you away right after you were, born, and said, what did he say? Something about we're going to check some things out or something, and handed you to the nurses, and I was still very tired from the whole ordeal, but...
Well, you damn near died.
Anyway, so, and then he said, he just brought you back and said, well, we've got a situation where she's born with just one finger on her left hand.
That sounds like he did it very professionally.
Oh, he did?
Oh, he did. We got it on video.
But I thought he said something about, like, she's missing a few fingers.
Yeah.
Oh, he did. Yeah,
he did. Missing a few fingers on her left hand, I think he said.
We're just going to go get something checked out. And then I didn't get to hold you at first, like you usually do. He gave you to the nurses. Yeah.
Because they wanted to make sure that there wasn't any other problems.
Yeah. Are there any toes missing, too?
Well,
what?
I think that they were more concerned about,
maybe vitals or...
Yeah, vital organs. Maybe there'd be some problems with some vital organs or something like that. But no, he didn't. That was what was kind of interesting when you go back and you watch the video. My memory of it, I haven't watched it in a long time, but my memory of it is that he didn't change the tone of his voice.
Interesting.
He just very matter-of-factly explained what was going on and everything, and then that was it. But you could tell the nurses, they hopped right to it. They knew what to do, and they took you over and put you right under the lights and looked you over really closely and taking your vitals and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, that makes sense because of what I've learned since I was a teen. I've been looking into my limb difference specifically more, and when I went to the hand specialist in high school, he told me, he said, well, typically with a limb difference like this, it'll go up your arm and into your breast muscle. Like, that's typically the deformity or malformation. Mine, he said, after looking at x-rays and, like, looking at it in person, he said, yours pretty much stops right at your wrist. I've got all my bones and muscles and tendons and everything all the way up. I think the only thing I've noticed different about it is that I have, like, two... Mm-hmm. arm creases versus the one.
Yeah.
But that
arm's a little shorter.
Yeah.
Than your other one.
You got a couple inches difference.
Yeah.
It makes sense why they would maybe be worried that there's some underlying issue, because if you're educated in it, you know certain things are tied to other things.
Well, and he actually told me, that you were the first baby of all the babies he's ever given, delivered. You were the first one that had a birth defect like that without them seeing it beforehand in the ultrasound, which back then they only gave a mother one ultrasound the whole pregnancy. Now they do them every month or every visit. So
well, and we've got the ultrasound video as well, right?
We do.
And you're sucking what looks like you look like you're sucking your thumb. But
with just like my hands, like
you've actually got your finger in your mouth.
Yeah, because you used to do that when you were a baby too. You just stick your hand in your mouth.
And then she outgrew my mouth.
Yeah, it was a little teeny
It was
tiny.
a party trick for a minute when I was little. I was like, watch this.
Yeah.
So the birth was a little bit, didn't go exactly as planned, right? So what did that look like after? Were there multiple doctor's appointments? Kind of like a good luck, you're on your own?
Nope. What happened was we took you to the pediatrician. When you have a baby in the hospital, you have your doctor for me, and then we had a doctor set up for you at the pediatrician. And she came in and she said, at first they thought it had something to do with a placenta or being wrapped in,
It was a caul.
Yeah. What?
I think they call it a caul.
Oh.
Or something that's wrapped around the prohibits the growth.
But then she was the one, the pediatrician was the one who gave us the doctor to go visit down at the University of Utah. And so at that point we made an appointment with him, and that was when he sat down. He took a x-ray of your arm to see, where it was and what was the bone situation. And then that was when he gave us the opinion that a lot of times what they do is they will take a toe from the foot and put it on so that you have some type of a grabbing sense and
Pincher.
yeah, like a pincher. You could pick things up or hold things.
Opposing digit or something like that.
See, it's the vocabulary that I don't think everyone has, right? Like, it's so scientific and...
Right.
Yeah.
And at that time, he also told us that with your type of birth defect, sometimes or normally it can happen on both hands, the same one, or both feet.
I remember being in 7th grade. There was a Ripley's Believe It or Not book at a friend's house. And she came up to me. She goes, "There's a family in here with your hand. They all have it on both their hands."
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yep. Yeah.
what?
So at that point, Dad and I thought, he said, get back to us and let us know. And this was probably within the first couple of weeks of you being born. And then that's when Stacy, our friend Stacy, reached out and said, hey, my sister, she's an adult now, and she was born with a limb different hand. Hers was more of just the hand but no fingers, and they're like little nubs, and you should talk to her. So that's when we talked to her, and she explained to us some of the difficulty that she had, that she'd wish that her parents had waited till she was old enough to maybe help decide what to do, because she was having issues with the bone graft from the toe.
When it would storm and stuff like that,
or
right?
when she'd even get sick, some of the infection would just go right to that, and so she'd lose some of that. And so that's when Dad and I just decided, well, we're just going to kind of wait and see what you do, what your limitations are.
Since there was no doctor recommending that, like, or was there?
Well, the hand specialist, he
recommend
it. He recommended taking the toe and grafting the toe.
But there was no, like, if you don't do this right now.
No.
Oh, no. Those
Okay.
were just our options.
Okay.
Yeah. And he even said that you could do it at any time. It didn't have to be done right now.
I do remember you guys periodically checking in with me throughout elementary school. Well, until I told you to stop checking in with me about it, I think. Which was nice, because then I had to get to that point where I was like, is this something I want? Is this not? And I remember a couple years, probably like second to fourth grade-ish, I was like, well, maybe down the line, because I think at that point you guys were just like, we could just go in and see, and you really left it up to me to continue that conversation, which I look back on very fondly. I appreciate that you guys let me navigate that more myself with support rather than feeling like I was on the ship you were navigating, you know?
Well, and really, we just sat back and watched you. What are your limitations? It didn't keep you from holding your bottle. It didn't keep you from holding your binkies. It didn't keep you from crawling. You crawled. You sat up. You ate food. You just found your way to eat, food.
Was I eating with my left hand
but
too?
you were, I think also...
You would get it wet, and then that's how you would pick up your Cheerios. So you could pick up I put Cheerios on your tray or food, and you would, because you had it in your mouth anyway, you would just pick it up. So you were eating with, you were picking things up with it.
But
and
I also think it was different too, because we decided pretty early on that you were right-handed.
Right.
And now with Stacy's sister, I forget her name. What's her name?
Amy.
Amy, when we talked to Amy told us, unfortunately, I can't remember, I think it was Amy's right hand.
It was.
She was right-handed. So she didn't have any fingers on her right hand. And so she said, I had to learn to do everything left-handed when naturally, I would have done it right-handed. So we felt that you were a bit more fortunate that way, just in that you were right-handed. If you had been left-handed, probably might have been a little bit different experience, although I'm sure you could have, learned to do whatever, so.
Kind of makes me feel like a dick for some of the things I've said to people then, I guess, when they've been like, well, are you right-handed or left-handed? And I'm like, why are you asking me stupid questions?
Yeah.
But I guess you're born right-handed or left-handed?
You are born right-handed or left-handed, and some people are ambidextrous, can use both hands. But other people, when you're born, it's just your right brain, left brain, or whatever. Yeah, and so that's the one that you would go with. So.
Well, I guess it's just like anything, too. Like, if you're in an accident and you lose multiple digits or anything, you have to just teach yourself to adjust or whatever.
And that's what she did. But for me, I always thought, you were probably fortunate that way.
Yeah.
That you were right-handed to begin with. So
I would agree.
Yeah.
So I was kind of just doing things on my own.
Yeah, we were just watching you to see if there were things that you couldn't do, and not very many things you couldn't do,
Dad and I talked about in another episode about when I learned to tie my shoes. What's that from your perspective, that story?
Well, I was all ready to... I had always just bought you the Velcro, because that was what was popular back then.
And for kids.
Right, and you wanted to learn how to tie your shoes, and so I remember sitting...
I took the initiative. I asked...
You wanted to learn how to tie your shoes. And so I had some shoes that were shoelaces, and I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out if I had to sit behind you or how to teach you. And so we kind of went over it, and I tried to teach you the, bunny ears and whatever. And finally I was just like, I don't, how I was with braiding your hair. So it was like that with tying your shoes. And then all of a sudden, one day you just came out and you had learned it yourself. And so you showed us that I guess you'd been in your room. You were, 5 or 6?
I've been telling people I was 3.
No, I think I agree with you. I think you were about 3 when you learned how to do it. Yeah.
It's probably because by the time you went to kindergarten,
I was teaching other
kids how to tie their shoes.
Yeah.
And so, and so it was just something that and you figured out how to do that, and I never would have thought that, because I've got 10 fingers that I'm trying to figure out how to teach you with, and so you just did it on your own.
Did you ever try things like Dad did, where he ace wrapped his hand and things like that to kind of put yourself in my shoes of what were some of your strategies as a mother to... You talked about thinking through, do I sit behind her? Do I what were some other...
I remember a lot of times I forgot that you didn't have fingers on your other hand because you were always just so good at doing whatever. Until I remember one day you were trying to peel a potato or a carrot, and I had just given you that and you're like, well, how do I do this? And so I was probably more oblivious than your dad because you were just so independent and just figured out how to do things. Or I know that you had issues buttoning up shirts and buttoning things. So a lot of times, especially pants and that to begin with, a lot of leggings. You wore a lot of leggings that you could just get yourself dressed. And but those were popular anyway. So
yeah, gauchos.
Yeah. Fixing your hair. You found your own way to fix your hair. Ponytail, or you'd put your barrettes in, or I could do a regular braid, but I could never figure out the whatever that braid is.
All right.
So
you don't got a braid to be a good mom.
But now you've learned how to do that yourself. You do your own French braids.
Sort of, not really.
Well, but
yeah.
Now messy braids are in style, and so it's like, I don't know. I was just, remember that time I told you should just go skiing, and you're looking at me like, hello,
Which I can. There's adaptive skiing, but I think, I think unless you see people like you do it, you kind of think, oh, maybe not. But then at the same time, I was in competitive soccer, which you don't use your hands in. I was in volleyball competitively. I did
You're throwing
dance.
The ball in. Yeah.
I did
piano.
You took
I
piano
did
lessons
do that for a year. And so you had a wonderful teacher that changed
She changed the music so that I only had 1 to 2 rolling notes on the left hand.
Right, and everything was mostly right-handed, and then you would do that. So she, you enjoyed that.
Do you remember any of that?
I do.
Could you sit down and play something, do you think?
I have, yeah.
Seriously?
A friend of mine has a music studio, and I went and I just was like, It's more like the simple and like Peter, pumpkin eater stuff.
Chopstick stuff. Yeah.
But I think I was thinking about it a couple weeks ago, actually. I saw another woman with a limb difference playing the piano, and I was like, I could do it if I just practiced again.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah. So I think I was 12 at the time. I remember getting picked up from piano practice to go with my friends to Lagoon all day, and it just wasn't my priority at the time.
Right. So no, I never did pretend I didn't have a hand, but there's been other times where my hand has been hurt or something, and I think, and I can't use it, and I think, wow, it's like when my friend, I went to help her wash her hair, because she broke her one wrist, and just to watch her and what she can do and can't do with that, and then she's thinking about that too, and it's like,
sometimes you just gotta ask for help, I think, is one thing I learned through it all. It's like, as strong as I was, and as much as I took the initiative to just figure it out on my own, growing up, I've learned it's easier to just ask for help.
Well, and you finally got to an age where I kept wanting to do things for you, and you kept saying, I'll ask if I need the help, because I would want to open up something for you or to do something, and you were getting frustrated with me for always wanting to fix everything or do everything for you, and you'd say, Mom, I can do it, just I'll ask you if I need the help.
How old do you think I was when that happened?
It was pretty young, maybe 2nd, 3rd grade. And I would try to do things, here, let me help you with that, or we'd want to cut your food, and that sometimes we just had to learn to just sit back.
How stressful though, even when I go to dinner, if it's especially a steak dinner and I have to be cutting something. When I moved to Spain and my family, I remember them being like,
yeah,
this chick's gonna cut more fingers off. And I'm just like, sometimes I am not the best with it, but I think it's having people who are willing to sit in discomfort while I figure it out in the same room is helpful.
And it was good for me, when you finally would tell me, I'll ask if I need the help, or, so then I didn't feel so anxious while I was watching you. I knew, okay, she wants to cut this steak herself, or meat, or spaghetti or whatever.
So that raises a question in my mind. I hadn't really thought about this before. Every steak knife's different. So
Well, I
some
hold
of
it
them
with my fork. I hold
you're
my
talking
fork
about-
with my left hand.
So you're cutting with. Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But it still scares the crap out of people. You know
Well,
what I mean?
but
Because if I ever...
Still, silverware is different, though, right? So some are probably easier to
Absolutely.
hold and manipulate.
Or
than
some
others.
are even actually pointy at the end. Like the fancier ones with whatever. And so it's like stabbing me as I'm trying to secure my food. Which I think probably like 4 years ago I just stopped caring. And I'll eat anything with my hands. And if anyone wants to tell me I'm being impolite, I'll just be like, you do it better than... I don't know. Like, there's a time and a place, obviously, but...
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't let it stress me out too much anymore.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, my memory is that you could always figure it out. I mean, I don't remember it. I remember trying to play. You wanted to learn how to play catch with a mitt,
Yeah.
and I remember we
figured
tried.
it out.
Yeah, we tried to do that, and you had it pretty well figured out. But I don't think you ever, and I don't think we spent a great deal of time on it. But I don't think you ever figured it out enough to where you thought, maybe
I could play this game.
Maybe I'll try to play on a club or something like that. I don't think you ever got that serious.
Well, I think you enjoyed other things like volleyball or
Well, it's
dance
interesting because
more.
my oldest sister played softball.
Yeah.
And so I had, like, a role model for it. I really just think I wasn't interested in the sport.
Yeah.
But I remember being down at my friend's house, and there were just a couple mitts and balls lying around, and she was like, do you want to play catch? And I was like, yeah, well, I got to figure it out first. And she helped me figure it out. She was like, and then I think I was just kind of practicing for a few weeks, figuring out if it was a thing. But I ended up putting because my hand is so small, a smaller mitt on my left hand. And then I would catch it with this hand behind. So this would close it. And then I'd drop it into, or like turn it and then grab it and throw. So I didn't have to I've seen professional baseball players with limb differences that like they'll just put it under there and then throw.
Yeah.
Like there's ways to do it.
Yeah.
I liked volleyball.
Do you remember when you
soccer.
wanted to jump rope with the other kids in first grade? And so we tied the rope to your hand, and then you would jump rope, and you could jump rope with the other kids out.
Which is still how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had to either, if it's my jump rope, I just cut the handle off because then it's flopping all over. And then I'd tie it into a knot. But when we were doing drills in volleyball, jump rope was part of the thing. I never did any like adjustments, accommodations, or anything. I did everything. I did the set drills. I did it all. Probably a little bit to my detriment. I probably did a bunch of damage with arthritis and whatever with my hand, but I digress. That's how I still do it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and back then they didn't have things to help your finger, especially when you were playing volleyball, that you probably could have worn, like one of those support
It was actually a
bracelets.
rule that I couldn't wear anything because when I injured this hand and I was wearing a brace, they had to make sure there was no metal or like structure in there to give me a leg up and hitting. So I honestly never thought about it. I do know the reason I never played basketball was because when I was forced to play basketball in PE or whatever, I jammed my finger every time and it hurt.
Yeah.
And it's a heavy ball, and so I was like, it's just not worth breaking my finger to me.
Yeah.
And to that note, I stopped playing soccer, which was a contact sport, because it became an issue with other
Coaches or
players. As soon as I realized that they were avoiding me because they didn't want me to touch them with my hand, I very quickly stopped liking soccer.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't think you ever told us that. Or me, anyway.
I don't think I did either. But it was solidified because then a girl I played on a team with in volleyball, she was on a different soccer team than me and played against me, and she told me, she's like, yeah, we knew you were the girl with one finger. And I was like, I wasn't hallucinating this whole time then, so.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
But then volleyball really gave me the chance to just like play with my teammates that knew me, I was comfortable with. And I had an amazing friend on the team who she was so inclusive with me that she would, you get into the huddle after every point, whether you win or lose. We go around, she smacks everyone's hands, both hands. She would change it for me. And she got good at it. And that just made me feel so seen and loved.
That's great. Who was it?
I'm not going to say. We're not.
Okay.
I don't.
Oh, all right.
It's okay.
Okay.
That's cool.
But they'll know, and they'll know that moment really did
Well,
mean
that's
a lot
great.
to me.
That's great.
Yeah. Still to this day.
Yeah.
I don't remember any other sports. Did you play any other sports?
I remember quitting dance.
Dance.
Obviously, I had terrible stage fright because your girl would get up there and just forget everything. But I remember it being a thing because when I was on comp dance, that's when you add in a lot more props.
Yeah.
And I ended up just being the girl that wasn't with a prop. Or they
I
would
remember
adjust
that.
it somehow, and
Yeah.
it was fine. I think I have a lot of really good experiences, but there were a lot of ways that coaches, teachers, adults could have really helped me a lot more in those moments. And I'd like to help that. You know what I mean? If there's any way I can make an impact in that.
See, that's why I think what you're wanting to do with, education for that, they probably just didn't know.
And that's, yeah.
What, just like
You don't
we
know
didn't
what you don't know.
You don't know, oh wow, well, how do we do that? How do we,
It's nice though because there are people out there who want to help. I was working with an owner of a bar studio, and she asked me, she goes, would you be able to come in and show us how we can better help people who need adaptions? Yes, I'd love to. And she just kind of wanted to know what that experience is like so that when people come to her studio, she knows how to help them. And that meant a lot to me because she just kind of asked me, she goes, would you be willing to come talk to me and help me learn about this? And I was like,
That's awesome.
sports are a huge outlet. And when you get told that you can't do it or shouldn't do it.
Sports or dance or music. And it seems like more and more kids with limb differences I think it's getting easier to come out into public and want to do things and be inclusive now because education is getting better. They are getting better with props or prosthetics or things, attachments that you can use. Like when you go weightlifting and, lift weights and stuff.
Well, it's like Jillian. She lifts so much weight, and she's putting these videos out there on social media of her, like, deadlifting the crap out of these weights. And she has an attachment here. This is where her arm ends, no hand, and she's probably wrecking dudes left and right who can't even lift that much, So it's nice to be able to have social media for kids like us, who we were, are able to see, no, you can do this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I was going to say, because I don't know that you had that many examples when you were a kid, right?
not even close.
We didn't have examples or knew of other kids except for Amy. But a lot of them were out there. It's just that they weren't coming out because there wasn't the knowledge.
Or you're not noticing it,
Right.
right? So maybe not everyone who went to the mall at the same time as me or past me knew I had a limb difference. That's one of the things I hear the most, even by people who I'm around frequently, is I didn't even know until you said something.
Yeah.
Or I just think it would have been awesome to walk into a Target and see a model with a similar limb difference than me and feel like I'm unstoppable instead of why am I being teased at school?
And now you see there's an anchor on TV who has a limb difference, and
It's also important to know that like
but everybody wants to be respected
the adults
for it.
who are advocating for it now,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have anyone advocating for us except for our immediate family. And so I'm still learning how to be part of a community people keep telling me I have. Because I don't.
Well, have you talked about the teacher who, in first grade?
We touched on it.
Did you? Talked about the
But-
kids were bullying you, and one little boy in particular, and she came up to me one day and she goes, because I was working in PTA at the time, and she said, hey, I have a great idea, because kids bully or are mean because they don't understand and they're curious. And so what would you think about bringing Chelsea in one day and having her talk to the kids and show them? And at first, and I asked you and you said yes, but you wanted me to do the talking. And so we went in and I did some of the talking, but then we had the kids try to tie their shoe with just one hand and one finger, like you can. And you
Some
showed her how to,
perspective.
yeah. And it was, I think they were all laughing and trying to do it, and oh my gosh, this is hard. I can't do this. And you just did yours right up. And from that point forward, I think things were better between you and the kids. And those were the kids you were with mostly from then
Till I
up through
graduated.
junior high. Yeah, and graduation. So
I think that's an
yay, shout out
important...
for that teacher to have known that
Totally.
about any kind of disability. It could have been,
Anything.
yeah, but she was aware enough to know that early on.
It helps to know that, like, it really does. You just have to help kids understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like I was put on display in any way that was exploitative or anything.
No,
It was very much, and it wasn't even in front of the whole school. It was just that one class.
just the class.
And word spreads. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Through kids, word spreads. And I think that's also something I kind of leaned on in a comfortable way, is like, I don't have to tell every new kid that comes in, my story. My friends will do it. They'll
Mhm.
help me out. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's just Chelsea. She was born with her hand like that.
Or they would ask them, hey, what's
Mhm.
going on with their, and then they would know.
Yeah.
And they'd have the knowledge to be able to explain it to them.
Sometimes I feel like I wish my adult friends would also do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that, like, if I go to a dinner and people see it, I don't have to make the conversation about me.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, my friend Chelsea, she has one finger. You'll notice it. She's usually open to talking about it. Like, if you want to ask questions, you can. But when you see it, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because it is human nature to be like, what? That's different.
Well, I think you can understand that most people are curious about it because it's not typical. It's
Yeah.
atypical. It's something that most people don't see very often. So,
Mm-hmm. But it almost feels like a comfort when, say, I'm going to meet, like, my friend's new girlfriend or boyfriend, and I'm going to meet them and talk to them, and I don't want the conversation to be just about me and how I was born.
Right.
My
right.
condition or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
honestly, every reaction is different, and I think that's what's important to note, is that just as different as all of us are, our reactions and actions to things will be different. And so it takes, maybe that's why I'm so empathetic, is that I have to pick up on how people are interacting with me, otherwise I will take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
Good intention is usually how people approach that stuff.
Well, that's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
Well, also, I remember when you got into FITM,
Mm-hmm.
and we went for your interview, and they wanted me to come in to the interview with you. And she was asking, because you were going into a degree or a subject that was visual communications, she wanted to know if they would need, you'd been accepted, but do you need to have someone to help you do those things? And they wanted...
Any accommodations?
Yeah, and
accommodations.
that was the very first time anyone had ever asked me if I needed an accommodation.
Yeah. Even
a
through high
school,
school, right?
yeah.
Nothing ever. They weren't aware. Or I don't know what. Maybe they just.
Well, I
didn't
just
have
think
the
it wasn't
options,
in the vocabulary. It wasn't, you didn't have, I just was not, I don't think, looked at as a student that needed accommodations, and I don't think that that was fair.
No, but also, what was your answer when they asked you
No.
to fit them? Yeah.
And I said, I'll ask for them if I need it. But I think the fact is I've never even been asked that before.
Right.
And, so,
And even when you had to do your window display in high school to show them, and you taped it, when you showed them, they were just amazed at FITM that you did that whole window display by
Alone.
yourself, alone. You did everything, all of the cutting, the pasting, the nailing, hanging, and all that stuff. And so, yeah, you
when
kill it.
she decides she's going to do something, she does it, I guess.
And you figure your way of doing it might be different than ours. So, yeah.
What was some of your guys' biggest fears as parents?
To begin with, my biggest fear was that you wouldn't be accepted, or that kids would make fun of you, because I was bullied in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my biggest fear to begin with.
Do you feel like I had genuine relationships with kids? You don't feel like... do you...
Definitely, I think. Yeah.
You've never had a problem with having friends, even just toddling around the neighborhood, and all the kids that would play and run around. They were all your friends, and I don't think they treated you any different. Do you feel like they did? Or
I have a few specific friends that made an impact in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And those are definitely relationships I don't look back on and think that they weren't authentic or
right.
substantial. I think as an adult, a lot of what my questions is how many of my past and current friends are friends with me to build their resume, kind of. To have a friend with a disability, to I hate to compare it to this, but a lot of girls like to have a gay guy best friend, and it's a thing to be proud of. I don't want people to think that they get any sort of gold star for being my friend, especially if you're not there for me in the ways that I need you to be there for me.
You suspect that that's happened, though?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it comes in waves, because it feels like they're only supportive when I'm being acknowledged for having a limb difference, and so they're on the bandwagon. My friend Chelsea did this. Go check it out. Not that I don't love support, because I do love support, but when that's the only time you're showing up, that's what's brought that question into my head. Because before I was talking about having a limb difference or being limb different in general, no one was sharing my posts. No one was sharing my accomplishments, things like that. And so it kind of just seems more philanthropic. Is that the word?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not what I want it to be.
No.
I just want to show that people with limb differences can live full lives as well.
What about boyfriends?
That was hard
Did that
growing up,
affect-
but I think I realized pretty quickly that there were good eggs and bad eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a boy when I was 12 who really liked me, and he didn't care that I had a limb difference. And then it happened again in 7th grade, and then 8th grade, and then 9th grade, and 10th grade was the first time a boy told me that he didn't like me because of my hand. And then there were times where maybe I suspected it, and that's fine. But there's also other reasons people don't want to be with someone.
Right.
And I was loud and obnoxious and kind of rude, and could have been all those other reasons. So it's hard to know unless they say so explicitly, like the one boy did.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened as an adult, right? I got berated by an adult woman with kids. about being a deformed bitch.
Mm. Yeah.
But then you learn pretty quickly, like, oh, this isn't about me anymore.
Right. This is her. She's
And
got
then I
issues.
immediately left, and
Yeah.
you never forget it, but you can separate.
Well, I mean, I'm like your mother. I always worried about, the way you would be treated, that kids would pick on you because of it. Because, I mean, anybody who's grown up in America, I'm guessing this happens all over the world, but I'm familiar with the Western United States, and kids are just terrible. They're awful.
You can be the prettiest girl in the class, and they'll find something to pick or to berate somebody about.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter if
It's
you're
usually
pretty or
because
not,
of their self-worth issues themselves that they've got to pick on somebody
Well,
else.
some kids are just mean. Some kids
Well,
are just naturally, I don't know if it's the way they were raised or if something happened in their head, but they're just not good people. And sometimes that starts pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worried about that. But you were pretty good at handling it, I think. Also, I mean, there's something that just occurred to me. When we consulted that hand specialist when she was a baby, he recommended to us. Do you remember this? He recommended to us that you go on the offense, and that you not only be defensive with kids, because he told us, he said,
Pardon?
her life will be a little difficult, so she needs...
That I would go on the offensive?
No, me.
Oh, that Chelsea. Oh, yes.
Yes.
He mentioned
he gave
that
us
you
that advice.
Mhm. And and he said that he had noticed that a lot of these kids who were born with issues are also born with a very strong will and strong spirit.
But he said, we talked about it after we left the office. I mean, he basically told us,
To be
you need to teach her to be mean when kids...
And we didn't
in those
think
situations.
so much about that.
Well, let me
resisted
tell
it.
you.
We were a little surprised. So this is a physician who does this a lot, and so I'm guessing that was his standard speech for every kid who came in with a limb difference. So
I remember until like second grade, I was pretty defensive about it. I was like, don't look at me. Don't look at it. Don't, very much that don't defensive attitude. And as soon as that dropped, everyone else's attitude towards me dropped too. That's bonkers that he would say that.
Well, that's just it. We immediately thought, I don't know if that sounds like the right approach to this whole thing.
Well, I'm glad that you guys were taken aback by it and didn't encourage me to do that.
Yeah. Well, you were strong-willed enough on your own, and not so much mean, but like you said, you were more protective of your hand.
I was really mean to kids at times.
Yeah. Well, mostly after they'd been mean to you. So.
Some kids, sorry, Whitney, that were never mean to me, I was mean to. Because I was using that outlet. I was attacking a more vulnerable person I saw as vulnerable, which she was just quiet. But she wasn't going to fight me back.
Yeah.
And blessed Whitney, she's still with me today. Still friends today through it all. But that's something I want to talk about is it's kids who are bullied, bully, and just because I have a limb difference, that doesn't excuse any of my behavior.
Right.
Just because kids were bullying me doesn't excuse my behavior towards other kids. And ninth grade was that turning point for me pretty heavily when I cyberbullied that girl and then got suspended.
Right.
And I am a firm believer in disciplining children who are bullies because you just won't learn or you're going to do a lot of damage. Bullying damages.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I know that you were concerned at one point about not wanting to have kids because you felt like maybe you could pass that on to someone else.
That was a big fear in high school.
Yeah, it was. And then I know that then you, at some point, changed your mind or
I think
explain
it just,
to us how you worked through that.
I think it got to a point where I was like, I would never wish this upon my worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
I would never.
That's what you would say to me.
And so there's must be something I'm missing, right? Like some really terrible part of it all that I was fighting with internally in high school that I don't remember at this moment. But I knew I was like, if I'm going to have to raise a kid like this and they end up asking me if I knew that this would be a possibility and I still did it, what would that make me look like, feel like? Is that something I'm willing to take on? Granted, I'm a teen and shouldn't be worrying about having children. And so I think once I realized I don't have to make this decision right now, I more pivoted to focusing on going to college and doing that I think it kind of worked itself out in the end.
Well, and also when we went to that doctor at the University of Utah and you were doing that report on your hand, did you also get information that you found out before where it wasn't just...
He told me that it's more likely that it was just a glitch in my DNA strand since you'd done genealogy and there's no history of it in our family,
right.
That's most likely what it was. And so that did give me some comfort, for sure. But I don't think it was like the end all of the worry. I think it was shifting my mind to focus on something else, right? But now I don't have to worry about it because we're not having kids.
But not for that reason.
No.
You're not worried about that. So, and I know
you can
that
thank the general
me,
world for the reason it is now.
I know that sometimes I felt guilty because when I had you, I was over 35, and so they considered it like a high-risk pregnancy. And so I felt bad about it sometimes, thinking that maybe it was because I'd had you so late, but the doctor, confirmed that no, that's not usually it. I had been healthy, I'd been eating right and things. But you did get to a point at some time in high school where you didn't want to have kids and that you were very angry.
And I heavily blamed you. It was a coping.
Yeah. We had a conversation once, and that made me think, maybe it was because I was older, but...
I don't blame you.
God.
And if I could choose to have this again versus a full 10 fingers, I would take this route.
I know that you had asked me if I had known, that would happen, would I not have you? And I said, definitely I would have you, so it was...
Grab us some tissues. Yeah, there's no...
I think...
blame or regret here.
What we went through with you your whole 27 years, and because of your hand, we've been able to experience some joys that we never would have been able to experience otherwise. You experience joys with all of your kids, but to see you accomplish something that we never thought you would do, or play the piano, or those things that just are little tiny things but huge, to you, we got to
and to you guys
that.
as parents who are just really not knowing what your child's future will look like in a world built for kids not like them.
Right.
And it's scary. I think, thankfully, now that we have a limb different community on social media that these parents can reach out to who are recently having kids with limb differences, there's got to be some sort of comfort that you guys just were never given. Or, you were able to find in a way, but it wasn't as easy as parents now. What were some of the things you were really frustrated about when you were trying to figure things out, but you just didn't feel like you had the resources? Were there resources you wish you had?
There were no resources. And even the doctors that we had talked to, their opinions of what we could do were things like, taking a
toe.
toe on and putting it on, and they didn't really know that much either about that. It was just all so new.
Yeah.
Well, and they didn't. I think that's the other thing. The thing that always sort of amazed me was that every doctor seemed to have a different theory as to why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, I hope I'm not casting aspersions on the medical community too widely, but
27 years ago.
well, yeah. But I also think that you know, if you're not confronted with this very often, then you probably don't have a great deal of knowledge about it. And so I understand that, but it was a little frustrating at the time. I don't feel any sort of, and I didn't at the time, I didn't feel any sort of animosity toward them or anything. It was just a little bit of a frustration.
Felt lost.
But also, well, yeah, also we just didn't, if there were resources, we weren't made aware of them. I think we looked. I think we.
But then also the internet is
out.
so new too.
Well, there was no internet back then. It was like encyclopedias.
Well, there was, but it didn't contain stuff like that's useful to this. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the internet's grown a lot since the 90s. So, you know. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't realize there was the internet.
Yeah. We were using it in the early 90s. So.
Do you remember that big setup in your house?
Well, yeah. Looked like
AOL,
a big TV set.
Getting
The ring in.
Getting onto AOL. Remember the long beeping noise where they had to, the noises had to
Dial
match
up.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean that's what it was like for us. Our experience wasn't anything like yours, but we cared about you and we wanted the best for you and we tried to do the things that we thought were useful and thought were helpful. I'm not so sure we always succeeded.
Well, and anything you wanted to do, we'd let you try. But we've done that with all the girls. You know, anything anyone was interested in, would let you try it and see if it, worked or what you wanted to do.
Well, that was the thing that always got me, though, Chelsea, was that I was always sort of really amazed and impressed that you wanted to do things that were difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, make my life as hard as possible.
Well,
That's been my
that you
theme.
wanted to play volleyball, that you wanted to
learn to play the piano,
to play catch, learn to play the piano. I mean, those were things that you just could have very easily just said, I'm not interested in doing that. I'll find something else to do. But you wanted to do the things that were challenging. And so
I think I just thought
me.
Everything is challenging. And so I either do some things or I do nothing.
You remember even you did a couple of years of snowboarding. You got snowboarding in, how difficult that was to get your boots on and off and onto the snowboard, and and that's a difficult thing.
Yeah, but
anyway.
That's kind of hard.
Normally, or not normally.
I didn't see it as more hard because of my hand. I feel like there were a few things. If I found it to be too hard because of my hand instead of just because of other reasons that everyone else also had.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would give it up, right? Because I was very insecure about my hand growing up. And so I didn't want to think about it more than I really needed to. So with volleyball, I wasn't a setter. I didn't need to know that skill super well. I could bump set fine. And it was an adjustment at a few different times. It wasn't like I was the only one playing the game differently. I also had other teammates that couldn't set worth crap. So they weren't setters, but not because they didn't have 10 fingers. Right. And so I think it was just part of my mentality to look at myself subjectively and be like, well, everyone else is struggling a little bit too. And so it's not enough for me to take myself out. There was a situation I had with you guys in a hot tub with another child and parents.
I remember that. Yeah.
I was afraid of kids. I was just terrified of kids after that. Will you guys tell that story? Because
I remember. I'll never forget it. Okay. That we were camping with our family, glamping because we had cabins in Jackson Hole, and was after a day of playing, and we went over to the hot tub cabin where the hot tub was, and we were sitting in there, and there were a bunch of bubbles and stuff, and there was another family over there with a little girl who was maybe 2 or 3, I think. How old were you? Maybe like 4?
I feel like I needed.
I think you were about the same age, actually.
Yeah.
I think so too, because I remember carrying you back to the cabin, and we were sat there and visited with them for probably 15-20 minutes.
Which means I was just like,
well, yeah, you were just sitting there playing in the
Bubbles.
bubbles and everything, and at some point you lifted your hand up out of the water, and the little girl saw it and just started screaming.
bloody murder.
Yeah.
Yes, in terror.
She was in terror. She was scared to
Jumping
death.
out of the
Yeah.
hot tub away from me behind her
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah, mommy, look at her hand. And she was just like screaming, and the parents were mortified. And just like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I just picked her up and wrapped her up and whisked off.
Yeah, there was no just like talking her through it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, it was like she had seen a monster or something, you know. She was that scared. And so we just wrapped you up, and you were crying because it made you sad, and I was crying, and we just went back to the cabin, and after that, the family just, I think we told them what had happened, and
What
And
was
I
the
think
way
your
I kind of
sisters-
processed that to you guys?
I think you were sad, and you got over it. You were sad, and
yeah, and we explained to you, you know, she didn't know, and you know, we're so sorry, and we asked you to tell us how you were feeling, and you were sad. You didn't quite understand why she would be so afraid. And then I think I remember your sisters stepping in after they had heard what had happened, and you know, oh, Chelsea, and you know, loving you, and
I don't know that we'd ever had anything like that before
We
or since.
hadn't.
I think that was a singular event.
That was like a very early memory of mine.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the only time somebody reacted like that.
yeah, I've never
So-
in the rest of the time had they. So
I remember I was like, damn, I don't want that to ever happen again. So I'm just going to avoid kids.
and you did. 'Cause I know even at church, sometimes certain kids would stare, and
I'm like, I'm going home.
yeah,
Which is something I'm very proud of myself for working through, because I'm glad I realize this about myself now. I love kids. I absolutely love kids. And I would be sad if I wouldn't be able to comfortably be around them because of something I hadn't worked through. And as soon as I realized that essentially I'm in control of the situation around kids, because I'm the one with the knowledge, I'm the one that can set the tone. There was a beautiful experience I had at my friend's house, and it's a friend's house, and then there's kind of like a community of people who come. So I didn't know this person super well or her kids, but it was a place we were frequenting together. Like, we would all be there, and so we all knew of each other, but there hadn't been like that dialogue about my hand, especially with her kids. And I just was like, you know what? I'm just going to take it upon myself. I don't need to make it a big thing. I don't need to like go talk to the parents instead of the kids. I'm just going to be that person that answers any questions and lets them navigate it as much as they want to navigate it. So it got to a point where I was like, she was like looking at it, and I was like, oh, do you see my hand? And she's like, yeah, like, what's going on? You can tell in her head. She's like, I've never seen anything like this. She's probably like 4. And I just was like, you know what? You know how you were born with 10 fingers? I was just born with 6. And her eyes kind of get a little softer, a little less big, you know, like starting to understand. And then her brother comes over, and he's interested too. And I was like, yeah. I said, look, it's even getting kind of pruny because I've been in the water for so long. Like, we're all just out here swimming, having fun. I said, I can do everything you can do too. And that was like the beginning of the test, right? They want to see everything you can do too. And so then it just makes you start playing with the kids. So I'm like, all right, you throw the ball, then I'll throw the ball too. Or we'll just play this game together. And then you can see, like, I'm doing things just like you, and there's no reason to be scared. And if you ever want to ask me more questions, you can always ask me more questions. If you ever want to touch it, you can touch it. You just got to ask me first. And then the summer ends. We don't really see each other anymore. The next summer comes around. That little girl remembered my name, my hand, and she was excited to see me at the pool the next summer.
Yeah.
And when her mom told me that, I just, as someone who hasn't always been that way, it paid off. You know, I was able to help that little girl understand, and I hope that she takes that to her friends at school when they see something different. And I hope her little brother takes it. Like, it's a ripple effect. I've come to realize that if I handle a situation poorly with people who are just genuinely interested in understanding, I ruin it for the next person with a disability and their experiences with other people, because then those people might be afraid to ever ask again. They are traumatized in their own way. They just have been eating themselves alive since they put their foot in their mouth, they feel like, or whatever. But I just don't want people to have a bad experience asking me genuinely and then keeping a good experience from someone else with a disability.
Well, and I often wonder with that hot tub situation that happened, if Dad and I hadn't have been so new to it, you know, and never had that experience before, we could have maybe foreseen something that was going to happen. And instead of, you know, grabbing you and the other family grabbing their child, then we could have maybe had a conversation or started saying something instead of both of us just being, you know, mortified and us not knowing what to do and worried about you. And
so would you recommend just having like a game plan for parents? Like, how do you guys want to handle this? Because walking up to the hot tub and being like, hey, our daughter has one finger,
right,
isn't the way.
No.
But as long as you like kind of have a preparedness to any potential situation that could come up, you could probably.
Well, I'm not so sure how it would have worked with you. Were at that age, you were pretty young.
yeah,
And I'm not so sure that you.
But
would
I
have
mean, we
cooperated
could have-
along with the.
right.
I might have been able to stay behind and talk to him about it or something like that, but
I know that in the future after that had happened, if I was with you at a store or something and I could see people looking at your finger or your hand, then would kind of have a conversation or say, you know, and you were okay with it to the point where you would let me say, you want to see your hand? Or she was just born like this with her hand, or, and that was more like when you were a baby, I guess, but it even would have conversation you could so that they could at least see it or look at it. And there would be sometime as you got older, if you saw people looking at it, that you would just leave it there so they could, and you would look the other way so they could just get
I do
their
that
looks at.
sometimes still. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, I don't feel like engaging or whatever, but I also don't want to change my behavior because of other people's behavior. Because then I would feel like I don't feel as comfortable or safe in public.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like exposure. It's the exposure therapy I was talking about in another episode with Dad. It doesn't hurt me at all to let other people look.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've decided for myself. Everyone gets to decide that for themselves. I know there have been times where I wanted to wear a jacket to school all the time because I could just hide it in my sleeve and put it in my pocket so that when people were looking, I didn't even have to think about it anymore. But now as I get older and I see the ripple effects of educational moments, I just think that's how I tend to handle it more
And
now.
that's something that you yourself has to learn and grow with and figure out how you your boundaries and how you can work with that. So.
And I'm not saying it's going to be like this forever, too.
No.
I might change my mind or go through phases. And the last thing for this episode I want to ask about. You guys said that there was a moment where I thought my fingers were going to grow in.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you guys? Navigating that.
It was at Lagoon, and you were on the merry-go-round.
How old was I?
Just 2 to 3. And
So I'm talking, but I'm...
You're talking sentences and, so probably closer to 3. And something was said. I don't remember what it was, but you had said something to the effect of, well, I'll be able to do that when my other fingers grow in. And all of a sudden,
Ooh.
yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, Dawn, she thinks her other fingers are still going to be growing in. And so Dad and I talked about how to approach it, and we just kind of sat down and talked to you and said, sweetie, this is, your other fingers aren't going to grow in, and you cried, and you were sad because you thought they were. And, but then that was the last time that you ever said anything about them growing back in. We told you, look at all these things that you can do. Some people have 10 fingers and you have 6, but you can do this and you can do this. And so this is just how Heavenly Father made you. And, this is, and you did cry because you were sad. You thought they were going to grow in, but then you moved on. So
it wasn't like a recurring theme.
No. Mm-mm. You seemed to pretty well understand from that one conversation that it wasn't going to happen, and so.
Did you guys ever see me looking at it or contemplating things about it, or?
I always saw you when you were younger looking at it, trying to figure out how to do certain things, like how to play with the toy or how to pick that up, or
but not just staring at my hand, or...
No, not when you were younger. Yes, because you were still little and trying to figure out how to do different things
and what my body was doing.
Were growing, yeah.
Well, I mean, when you'd get hurt, there was a little extra. It was, when you'd get a cut or a scratch or something like that, there was a little extra attention paid to it because we wanted to make sure that you didn't get an infection and just have something that caused that aggravated it. So
I remember being like, man, I'm never breaking this finger because I don't know anyone who knows how to put it back together.
Yeah.
Seems like no one knows what my finger is, so we better just keep it how it is.
And it seemed like the older you got, the less it bent. Like when you were first born.
Well, it's basically just cartilage, yeah?
Yeah, and it would bend and touch it would touch because it was just a little finger thing.
Little flob.
Flexibility when you were
but the older you got, then the more it didn't bend as much.
Because we did talk about, at one point we talked about going in, and we talked to you about it, going in to have surgery maybe to make it so that it would
bend. Because
and you could bend it like this. Because this knuckle here doesn't bend.
You would jam it every once in a while. I don't know if jam's the right
quite
term.
frequently, actually.
You would, because it wouldn't give.
Right here,
it would hurt, and so
We even talked to the doctor, now that you're saying that, when we were there to see if there was a surgery that you could do to make it so that it would bend like this, so that you could grab things better. And I think they said no.
Well, because the issue is that I have a standard knuckle here, and then I have almost a backwards knuckle here. It doesn't go forward, but it goes.
And that other one doesn't bend at all.
And then this one right here, I have a knuckle. It formed like a square. So it does this. Like, even when I'm doing this, I can feel it moving within the knuckle, but it's only like this. So it's just about that much. Yeah. And that's what he said, was that, if it were round, like any other knuckle, it would move within. And so I was like, I'm 17 almost. Do I want to learn how to reuse my hand with everything? And then what if it hurts after?
Right.
What if there's like a...
And they weren't sure that it would work or the whole process.
And I know I struggled with the way it looks for a long time. And so even when I was in college and I cut like they said not to and cut myself with a brand new X-Acto knife, I was like, if this makes my finger look uglier than it already is, I'm gonna be so mad. And now I'm like, this was also pre-tattoos and stuff, so I was really worried about what it looks like. And now I just have a slick little scar.
You had to go to the emergency room, right, to get it stitched up?
And I didn't tell anyone that I was missing fingers at birth, and so they were all like,
Oh, yeah.
where are her fingers? They're not on ice.
Right.
My roommate rushed me to the ER, and I had a washcloth with a hair tie wrapped around it to put pressure on it.
Oh my gosh.
And by the time the nurse or doctor, whoever came in to take it off of me, the blood had dried it back together because it was such a slick cut.
A nice slit.
Yeah, it was probably like this deep too.
Uh-huh.
Brand new X-Acto knife. It's about an inch long, and it had just with the dried blood, and they wrapped it, and I went back and I finished my project and presented it the next morning.
So you didn't actually get stitches?
No.
Did they glue it, or did they just leave it?
I think they left it.
Really?
They just wrapped it really well, and I kept it on. It was right before Christmas break. I had a flight either that night or the next day because it was the last day of school the next day. And they were like, well, we can give you like a note. And I said, that's not the way my school works. And I walked in, and my instructor was like, well, what the hell happened here? And I said, I went to the ER last night because I cut myself with an X-Acto knife. And he goes, oh, that's why your cuts look like this. And I said, give me my grade. I'm going home. That's a lot of stories and details about growing up and raising a kid limb different, but thank you for coming on and talking about some hard things. And I hope you guys will come back again. Because I'm sure there will be more questions, and I will have more questions.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love
Our
you guys.
pleasure. We love you.
If you liked this episode or liked other episodes, thank you so much. If you could like, rate, subscribe, share, comment, DM me your thoughts and questions. I'd love to chat with you guys. I'm your host, Chelsea, and I hope you give a fuck too.